Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ Podcast.
Why don't you wait until July 1st to make an announcement? What a disgrace. He can rack up all these numbers in October, November, and December, but what really counts is let me see this in January.
The sports rebel without a pause, delivering fast-paced, jam-packed sports talk like no other.
Listen, I gotta call it as I see it. He is not a good player. I'm sick and tired of having to deal with the disappointment of this franchise. When does it stop? And yes, another winter that I can sleep in peace. Coming correct, direct, and in full effect. Let's get it.
This is the JAYREELZ Podcast. Welcome aboard.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Today, joining me is a very special guest from Action Network, Marino, as we discuss in detail her broadcasting journey to where she is now as one of the lead hosts of that network and a show that she'll get into. You may be familiar with her face from her days at SNY, especially if you live in the Northeast here in New York City, where I do, as she worked on SNY doing various things. We talk about a lot of her journey, a lot of the things that she went through to get to this point, as well as her influences, whether personal or professional. We also talk about women's college basketball. We get into a lot of different things, and even a little spiritual from a sense of the power of P words. So that's also fascinating from that regard. So without further ado, here she is in living color, my guest, Maria Marino, and I'll see you on the other side. For starters, Maria, thank you so much for participating, being a part as a guest here on this podcast. So for starters, I have to ask, considering that now you've pivoted from one network to another, which we'll get to later on, but I'm curious to know about you getting into this business even prior to that. What sparked a passion or even a fire for you to want to get into the journalism business, or even to the point where you're at now, where you're a studio host on a major network? So kind of walk us through that whole scenario.
Well, there were two parts of it. The first one was just understanding that I'm a storyteller and being interested in journalism. And that happened when I was a junior in high school. I took a journalism class and just really had a knack for it. I always liked writing. I always felt like I was a communicator. And that class was really the first light bulb moment of like, wow, this is something I could see myself pursuing as a career down the road. So that's kind of what sparked that. Going into college, I knew, and you know, not everybody knows when they're going into college, like what they want to do. And it's totally okay if you don't, but I was just lucky enough that I found something that I was passionate about, that I also felt like I had a knack for, that I could pursue in a professional realm. So I majored in communications and journalism. I actually started at a community college in New Jersey, Sussex County Community, which happened to have a very good radio and TV program. So prior to that, I mostly did writing, but I also enjoyed the conversations. I enjoyed the face-to-face interactions with people that I was interviewing. I always felt like I had I wasn't scared of public speaking. And so I think that kind of naturally gravitated me toward the radio TV side of things. Transferred to Ramapo College. That's where I finished my bachelor's degree and just kind of went from there. And I had a lot of different experiences throughout college where it kind of set me up to be able to do this professionally. And it wasn't an overnight thing. It definitely took time. You know, I always say I got my first full-time job when I was 29 years old, which people like go, but like, if you're in this industry, you kind of know that you're going to be probably working a lot of part-time and freelance jobs and side hustles until you can sort of get on your feet. So one aspect was the journalism aspect. The other was the type of content that I wanted to do. So I always really liked sports, and a lot of my experiences in school, like I was a local high school sports writer for a paper near where I grew up. There was a local access television station that I did, high school football games, reporting, things like that. So I liked sports, but like, I didn't necessarily think it was that realistic. So I didn't really pursue it that hard at first. It wasn't until later that I actually felt like, I can, like, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for the sports thing.
Well, that's interesting. So knowing that from high school when you were writing, it's not as if maybe when you were a little girl, whether, now I don't know if you have brothers or let's say your dad was a big Yankee fan or a Met fan, and he's yelling and screaming at the TV, and then you just kind of gravitated to that because that's what you knew growing up. It was a thing where once you started writing in college or in high school and you were able to maybe gravitate to sports, could be a little bit too strong, but when you started going in that trajectory, all of a sudden it was like, hey, the light bulb went off. And getting into sports, was that difficult, even though you did like it, but knowing that obviously between the history and so much that's involved, was it a little bit intimidating to go that route? Or was it just a natural progression to say, hey, this is what I want to pursue, this is where I want to go, and I'm just going to reach for the stars in this process?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, growing up, as I kind of alluded to, I was a sports fan. My dad was definitely screaming at the TV, usually at the Giants, big Giants fan. And I followed it a good amount. I was a big basketball fan. My older siblings were Duke fans. So, I mean, when I was in high school, I would like print out the schedule of all the games. I would watch every game on TV. So like, I was into it. I didn't see, like, I'm like, how do I make sports, a part of the career? But I was kind of led there in a natural, organic way. I had a job working at a radio station in New Jersey, which is now, I believe they've closed. It was like a local radio station called WGHT. And I was doing local news reporting and anchoring. So I was going to like, municipal meetings and, just like community events, things like that, doing stories, and loved it. But around that time, a couple of buddies of mine from high school were doing a sports podcast, like for fun. And they asked me to come on, and I loved it. And it was super fun. And, I was giving my sports opinions. And then before I knew it, became like sort of a weekly thing. And I was like, I can do this. I have a unique ability, I think, to have a bit of confidence and to share sort of my takes and to understand sports. And, at that time I was obviously younger. I was probably mid-20s. And so I didn't necessarily understand what I was getting into at the time, but I did know that I could handle it. And by that experience with the radio station, it gave me the ability to create a demo, which I used for a job opening at Sirius XM, where they had a sports anchor job. And luckily they brought me in and they gave me a shot. And that was kind of my first like real taste of the sports media industry in like a legitimate sense. Like I said, I had done other odd jobs and local stuff, but like, this was like, okay, I'm in New York. I'm at like a bigger company. And I think I was intimidated at first, just because you asked me, like, was it difficult to get into? It was, because I felt like I was not necessarily, my foundation of knowledge in sports was general. It was not to the level of my coworkers, who most of them were much older than me. Most of them had been following sports their whole lives. And even, I felt like even the guys that I did the little podcast with from my high school, like, it's just different. Growing up, I like sports, but it was like eat, sleeping, and breathing. They watched every game. They knew everything. So it was like, I had to kind of keep up. And so those first few months at Sirius XM, I definitely felt like I had to get some homework. I really needed to like just brush up on a lot of things. And I did. I mean, I studied a lot. I just absorbed everything. I listened to sports radio every day. I listened to as many different things. I watched as many documentaries as I could. Like, I really tried to make sure I was every day following the news, reading up, making sure I got a good understanding and foundation, which I believe is has served me, because I always I've tried to be prepared for anything I do.
No, and that's terrific, because I'm one that, as I mentioned earlier prior to the start of this recording, being 54 years old, and of course, sports is in my DNA. And it's one of those things where, especially in this day and age where there's tons of podcasts, so many platforms, that people, I think, are just prisoners of the moment, that everything, like, sports didn't start until 2010 or what have you. So if you go back, let's say, even to the 80s and baseball leading into the steroid era, et cetera, it's one of those things where if you go back that far, it's not cool to even get into. And I can only imagine, like you mentioned with the podcast that you did, where these guys were just immersed in sports, and that gave you I don't want to say incentive, but that was something that you knew right away, that, hey, if I'm going to be serious in this business, I'm going to have to go full bore on knowing all this. So that is something that I commend you, because so many people just look at sports as, right now, the NBA, it's all about LeBron, the Lakers, or football, it's all about the Cowboys or Patrick Mahomes, where you could sit down and obviously have a discussion about, oh no, we could talk about your dad being a Giant fan, going back to the 86 Giants or whatever. So that's a testament to you and being able to absorb a lot of that knowledge over the years.
Well, thank you. I mean, I do feel like when I started, there was definitely a bit of a gap. I was definitely more knowledgeable in current sporting events, than I was the history of it. But I've gotten, at this point, I think, enough of a background, and I also, like, am not afraid to listen.
That's important.
I don't claim to know everything, and I really just try to listen as much as I can. And at times when I have questions, I go and find the answers, so that, I have context. To me, context is everything, and not just for my own understanding, but for the job that I do when I'm presenting to a show audience. Like, I want to make sure that they have a full grasp of whatever the story is, whatever the topic is, because you mentioned being a prisoner of the moment. And I do think that's something that people struggle with today with social media, and the method by which we learn of stories is so incomplete. Like, when we scroll Instagram or Twitter and we get a certain number of characters, or a video that's under a minute, or a caption, or even a lot of times it's just a graphic with a quote, and we have no understanding off the top of what else was said in that quote. What were the circumstances of how this person was asked, the framing of the question that they were asked. And people are so quick to react before they really want to do the work and find out the whole story. So I really try to, like, when I see something that I am like, like something that grabs my attention, before I form any sort of opinion on it, I mean, I might have my initial gut reaction, but I need to go find out more. I need to find out, okay, what are the circumstances behind this, and the details, because I am not a fan of sort of these quick trigger, drastic reactions, because I think it's damaging. I think I think it's damaging in a lot of ways for, whoever the subject matter is, and also the people that are absorbing it. Like, I think media literacy is something that's so important. And now with social media, that's a huge, huge aspect of it.
Absolutely. And it's all about the clickbait material. It's all about just trying to get out their headline or get out their story before anybody else. And there's no credibility behind it. And that's one of the things, I get it, with the world that we live in with social media and people like myself who are trying to make a name. It's like, oh, what could I do to upset the apple cart? Or what could I do to get my name out? And people will go ahead and take those drastic measures or routes. And of course, in the long run, it's not going to pan out. So that's also a kudos to you. And now that I think about it, I know you mentioned SiriusXM. So that was after Ramapo College, correct?
Yes, but there was like a few years in between there, like it wasn't as if I sort of graduated college and just, got a job in this industry. It was, I think it was like a year and a half or so. I worked at like an in-house media job at a resort, which was really funny. I was actually like a snow reporter. They call it so. I grew up near like a ski mountain and like golf resort. And I worked in their like marketing department, and so I would do blogs, I would do YouTube videos, I would interview like if they had special guests there, and I really learned a lot. I edited my own videos, I shot everything myself.
Great.
So I got great experience, and then it was like a little period of like, okay, what am I doing with my life? Where like, because again, it's nothing is straightforward in this industry. It's for the most part, it's really like a roundabout path, I think, for most people. And that's something that's you need to either accept, or you need to be like, maybe this isn't for me, or whatever. But yeah, so like it was definitely a few years in between. And I've talked about this recently. Like, so I talked about the local radio job, which was WGHT. That to me, I didn't really know it at the time, but that was kind of a break for me. And even though I was part-time and making $12 an hour, I loved the gig. It gave me so much great experience. It taught me so much great like news judgment and just my skills on the air. Like that was really important. And if it were not for that gig, I wouldn't have got hired at SiriusXM.
Sure.
And if it weren't for SiriusXM, I would not have gotten into a situation where I could start to network. And networking it's crucial.
Yes.
And so it was that's where I started to network, and that's where the other doors started to open.
And then instantly enough, from Sirius, did you go to SNY, or was there a matter of, I guess, months or time between going from satellite radio to now network TV?
So even being at SiriusXM, it was a part-time thing. So I would work there probably about 3 days a week, sometimes more, whatever. And through there, I learned of other opportunities. I started working, once or twice a week at NBC Sports Radio at the time. And then eventually a network called FNTSY, which is now Sports Grid. And there was a period of 2 or 3 years where I was working at all 3 of those jobs at the same time, in addition to any other freelance ops or one-off opportunities that would come up. So all told, I was at SiriusXM for a few years, but not just at Sirius. And I think probably like I said, it's called FNTSY, now Sports Grid. That was the first like regular on-camera gig I had, where I was getting reps in front of the camera multiple days a week, doing different segments. And that's definitely, I think, what provided me with the content to build a reel and to sort of catch the eye of SNY. And then that my next chapter was at SNY.
All right. Before we get into that, so when you were at Sirius, what was your format? What type of sports talk did you do there?
So I tried to do as many different things as I could, but what I got hired to do was like update anchor, sports update anchor. So, but they have so many different channels. They had Mad Dog Sports Radio, and I also did updates for NBA radio, MLB network radio, NFL radio. So depending on the shift, I was doing a lot of different things, which was great. It was forcing me to become well-rounded and understand everything that was going on and like really all the major sports. And I started to develop a personality and build rapport with some of the other, like for some of the hosts. So I started doing regular segments. I started pitching segments. I had a segment on NBA radio called Maria's Court, which was kind of like a judge type of a segment where like the two hosts would argue and I would settle the argument and make my verdict, which was really fun. I pitched them weekly WNBA segments, which I did for a season. And then as far as like, if I was anchoring on Mad Dog Radio, I developed, I think, chemistry with some of the hosts where they would just bring me on for different segments and we would just talk about whatever. And I would try to, as much as I could, I would say, hey, like if you ever need someone to come on, like I'll come on. So I started kind of weaseling my way into more airtime besides just the updates. And at that time, you know, media companies were really starting to dig in digitally and make, be multi-platform, create content that could live beyond just, on the air, but to live online. And so I started kind of trying to take advantage of that and say, hey, like I can go do an interview, here. I can host a, like a quick like video short, like really anything I could think of, I would try to put in front of people. And so yeah, that was basically what I did at Sirius.
No, and that's interesting too, because I'll get to the reporting part in a second, but when you go from Sirius to I'll say it's just fantasy because I know it's FN. I forgot what
fantasy,
the call letters were.
Call it fantasy. Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, to SNY. Now, I understand it was gradual. I understand you got some reps there in between, but was there, I don't want to go as far as saying, was it intimidating, but was it a big adjustment for you knowing that, all right, I'm in front of a microphone, but obviously not with a camera in front of me, to the point where now I have the camera in front of me, the lights are on. Oh, geez. How is this going to go from the start leading from Fantasy Network over to SNY? Was it a big adjustment or not?
I think maybe at first I had some nerves, but that was more so because I knew it was a really big opportunity and I wanted to make sure I executed it. It wasn't the lights and the network didn't necessarily intimidate me. Once I did my first one or two shows, I think that was kind of out the window. I think I naturally felt comfortable in front of the camera from before that. And my experience just gave me confidence. Like I just felt at that time I had enough experience that I knew that as long as I prepared, like I always do, and could be myself, then I would win over, the other people I was working with, and hopefully the audience along with it. And so yeah, I do recall the first time I was booked on SNY and being very nervous in the lead up. But again, it was more just like, okay, don't blow this. But really after that first show, I felt very good. And then I started appearing regularly and it was off,
Right. And you were there for how long? 5 years?
Almost 5 years, 4 years full time.
And full time, you were pretty much I don't want to say jack of all trades, but of course you were a studio host. You were also a reporter.
Yeah.
And you wore all those hats. So I'm curious to find out, which one did you enjoy more? I'm sure you enjoyed it, and it's kind of hard to choose, but I'm wondering which one that really.
I enjoyed the variety. I definitely like switching things up. So I liked that I could do studio hosting. I liked that I could go out in the field and report on events in person. I also got to do a betting show for 4 NFL seasons every Sunday, which I loved.
Wow.
And I think that's kind of played into what I'm doing now. But just to answer your question, I think a role that I definitely became associated with was covering UConn women's basketball. And I particularly enjoyed that, number one, just because I'm a big hoops gal. Like basketball is just my favorite sport to cover and talk about.
Right.
I was covering a legendary program,
Absolutely.
One of the best ever across any sport. And just seeing those athletes up close, being around the coaches, it was very cool. I never took it for granted. And also I became really invested in the women's game because when I first started covering WNBA back in like 2018 or so, I really enjoyed it and really loved it. And just as much as I loved watching NBA, and I was just kind of at the time taken aback by some of the social media conversation around it, which was negative, and I hated that. And so I wanted to make sure that I did a good job in reporting on it in a way and showcasing it in the same way I would the men's game. And I would say that on the positive side, like that social media conversation has been shifting quite a bit. And so right now in 2023, it's at a much better place. And there's, you know, a lot more respect for the WNBA, for just women's basketball in general. But I think that particular niche has been a significant part of my journey.
Right. And it's interesting. I'm going to ask you I don't want to say a tough question, but considering coming off of the great Final Four that we've seen on the women's side and the whole, I don't know if you want to call it a controversy with Caitlin Clark, but to ask you, did you think what you did was wrong, right? Did you feel like, hey, it was just the competitive nature of what she was doing, going back to the Elite Eight game, I know, with Louisville, and then, of course, waving off the South Carolina guards, and then we saw what happened there in the championship game, which I guess karma came back to bite her in the rear end. But how did you feel about how was your assessment of all that? Did you feel that maybe she was out of line, or did you feel like, hey, that was just the nature of the game, and unfortunately it got her in the end?
I mean, first of all, I don't think that Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese should be sort of viewed as if they like screwed up in any way. I think that they are both big winners coming out of this tournament. They are big winners for the eyeballs they've drawn to the game, for how well they played the game, for their ability, just their sheer skill, their athleticism. And I think their personalities are sort of icing on that whole cake. And I think regardless of how you feel about, trash talking or showboating, you are still talking about the sport. And I think that's exciting. And we've seen sort of like this unprecedented amount of social media conversation about it, which I think is just kind of good timing for everything else that has lined up in women's basketball, as far as we've seen now for a few seasons, viewership going up and up and up. And we've seen increased media coverage in general, which has helped. And we've just been seeing all of this great momentum around the sport. So I'm okay with it happening. It's not my personal favorite. I'm kind of like I was thinking about this, and I don't know exactly how I would be, because obviously most of us have never been anywhere close to a situation like that where you're playing a game. And I think that's part of what bothers me sometimes about people and their judgment, because these are young women or young men that are in a situation that most of us would never fathom. And we're very quick to judge. And I understand that they are public figures. And so they are, they are in a position to be judged. That's part of it. When you're any sort of public figure, like, you're going to have people that like you and people that don't. But when we talk about not just their extracurriculars, if you will, but also just the skill part of it, people that are like, sort of, when I've seen people like hate on women's basketball in particular, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about, because there's just no way. If you think you've played any level close to that, you haven't. Sorry, you haven't, unless you've like, it's like, let me know if you've played in like a D1 national championship game. Like, just let me know. So I think that plays into it too. But anyway, I'm rambling, but I was
that's all right.
For myself, obviously have not been anywhere near that, but I like to play. I play beach volleyball pretty competitively. It's kind of a hobby of mine. I play basketball too, but not as much. And I get fiery. I get loud. Like, I celebrate, but I don't usually go to the other person and get in their face. And because, I guess maybe I'm just too scared that is going to come back to bite me.
Right.
Because, well, there's that. But I also think sometimes too, there's an element of like when you're silent, it's like even more annoying.
Mm-hmm.
And it really depends on the opponent too. I think that's something as an athlete that you have to know going in.
Right.
My opponent, what's going to rattle them more? Me ignoring them and me basically not giving them the time of day, or me getting in their face and trash talking them, because there are athletes that thrive on either or both.
Yep.
Like there are some athletes where you're just going to wake up the beast. You're just going to wake up the monster. So now what I'll say about like Caitlin Clark didn't specifically trash talk Angel Reese prior.
No,
so that was a little like surprising, but at the same time, Angel Reese was in her moment, and she at that moment had the advantage of like, yeah, I just won the national championship. I just beat your ass. And so I'm going to like, hey, like who's on top of the mountain now? So, I get it.
Yeah, that whole "you can't see me" with I believe that was in the Elite Eight game that Caitlin Clark did it, and of course it came back to bite her. But I totally agree with what you said, and I'll try to keep this in a tidy 15 seconds or less. I understand we live in a day and age where whether it's bat flips, first down calls on the field, athletes are going to do that. And right, it'd be nice if it would be a thing where act like you've been there before, but I understand when you're in the moment, just like Angel Reese, and it's fiery and competitive, and you know that you have that advantage, they're going to show their emotion. And in that case, it did. So like you said, there was no right or wrong, but to really crucify her or praise Caitlin Clark, or it was just, it was uncalled for.
Well, here's the other thing too. And this is a great teaser for next year. And now I'm really excited for next year's tournament. I mean, it broke records for viewership this year. I think next year is even going to be through the roof because both these players are coming back, baby. Both of them they're not in the league yet. So like, this is going to be just build up for next season. And overall, it's just going to be great. And I just wonder who's going to have the last laugh.
Yes. And yes, we have to wait another calendar year to find out. But yes, come March of next year, I'm sure everybody's going to be anticipating to see if LSU and Iowa will, of course, butt heads once again.
Yes.
All right, a couple of quickies. I want to be mindful of your time. So now from SNY, you're currently at Action Network. And I'm curious to know, was it a thing where it was just time? Did you feel like this opportunity was going to even raise your profile more? Or was it a situation where you just thought maybe what it is that you wanted to do there at SNY, and which you did a lot, but you weren't going to get that type of opportunity there than you are here at Action Network?
Yeah, for me, it was just all about challenging myself to do something different. Having an opportunity where this network, Action, they are newer. They've been around for a good 5 years, but not as much of a traditional entity. I love the fact that I could come in and really help mold what we're doing here. I've always been pretty hands-on. I've wondered about my role and my future, and I wouldn't be surprised if I end up trying to do some sort of decision-making role. I like that, I have a lot of influence here. And I can, like I said, I can really just help shape the content. They're building something, and I'm excited to be a part of that and hopefully help just elevate and do what I can. So I think that played a role. And then like for me specifically, the challenging part of it, I guess I just didn't want, it's not that I didn't want to, it was just given the two options. I felt like staying in my same role at SNY, I would be doing a lot of the same things moving forward in the next couple of years. And I felt like I would make me more well-rounded to do something a little bit different. And so I am doing a daily show here Monday through Friday called Green Dot Daily. Action Network logo is like a little green dot, so that's where that comes from.
Oh, okay.
Little check. And so it's kind of cool. Like I've never been the regular host of a show before. Like I've always, like we talked about, I kind of bounced around. So it's like, okay, this is kind of my show. I'm hosting it. I can they can build around sort of my personality. help give it an identity. And then also there's a podcast network here. And I've always loved this part of it, this like long form conversation. Yes. I do kind of miss the radio side of things. I love it. And so I'm like, okay, we're gearing up for taking their podcasts and packaging sort of a WNBA focused podcast. So I'm excited that's in the works. So it was really just like not being stagnant and forcing myself to just continue to grow. And also like in the meantime, I'm still going to pursue some other things that I'm interested in on the side. But they were like flexible with all that. And like I said, they just, they definitely made me feel like coveted. And I think that played a role too.
Oh, terrific. And then it's interesting. I actually read an article recently that you were interviewed in. And one of the things that really stuck out as I look at it here, it says that you're not afraid to be uncomfortable, I guess, in anything, whether it's business, personal, etc. So I'm curious to find out, where did that come from?
I think it comes from when you're like innately a perfectionist, you're never really comfortable because you're never like and I have to work on this. This is like something I need to work on in my life. But like when I do something lately, especially, I'm trying not to make perfect the enemy of good. So if I do something really well, I'm trying to not focus on all the little things that I wish I did a little better. I want to be cognizant of those, but I also want to acknowledge the good things that I have done. And so that's part of it. And I also just think in this industry in general, you're just never really comfortable because there's always hope. I think if you're the way I've done it anyway, it just always seemed like there's always something more. Like you're always like, what's next? What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? And that doesn't even necessarily mean like changing jobs or getting a different job or a new job. It could be within your daily job, your day to day, just, what else can I do? I think pushing yourself is sort of part of it. And I say all the time, like, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you know what? Maybe it's not even just this industry. Maybe it's just in general to like push yourself to that full potential. It's going to be uncomfortable. Like change is uncomfortable, but like I said, change is where growth happens. And so I think part of it is innate, maybe most of it. I'm trying to think, I'm like, where else did that come from? And I'm not really sure that it maybe there was me recognizing that and accepting it. Yeah. But I'm not sure if there's like a true source of it beyond just nature.
And that's the thing too. Like you said, it is innate, and Lord knows for so many years, just trying to hone my craft and do this and think that, oh, this didn't sound right. Or, I failed here or whatever. And it's easy to not take a step back, and not to say you're going to pat yourself on the back, but even the small victories, we always look at.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
I literally have a note in my phone that says small victories, like for years, because I would try to remember like, okay, I did this. Because I'm sorry to cut you off, by the way, but like right. Persistence. I say this too. This is like one of my sayings, like patience, persistence, progress. Like things are not going to happen overnight. And like, I have dreams that I have yet to achieve that I'm still going to be pushing for a long time. And you're not a failure until you sort of give up on that dream, and maybe it's not even a failure, because I think that's harsh. I think sometimes dreams change and priorities change. And so I want people to understand too, that that's okay. Like if you make a pivot or you try to go after something, but your priorities have changed, and that's like totally fine too. But as long as you're making progress, that's a big part of it, because you're still movement is everything. And then like I said, the persistence piece, it's like, okay, I've been told no.
Right.
I've thought that certain things were going to pan out that didn't. And I've learned to like accept those and like, okay, on to the next. And so I think those are sort of three P's, three pillars that are like important for the journey.
Yes, not only professionally, but personally, because as we all know, we could have the greatest day on earth and it could be fantastic. But guess
Yeah.
what? With the Lord's
Yeah.
will, if you wake up the next morning, you got to do it all over again. You got to make sure they can kind of either keep that good momentum going, or even if you get knocked down a peg or two, you have to remember it's just temporary. We're going to have to regroup and get back up again and not just sulk or not just say, oh, you know, woe is me.
Yeah.
It's very important to continue, like you said, to use those 3 Ps, and that's very important.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let me give you some rapid fire before we bid adieu.
Yes.
Who are some of your, if not one, maybe some of your biggest influences in life?
In life is hard. I mean, definitely my parents, my siblings. I just appreciate them all. They're all very different walks of life than what I'm doing, but they all have families, and you know, that's like another whole ball game like that I have yet to experience. So I respect that. And you know, both my parents, like they were both athletes. You know, I talked about sort of my dad being involved in sports and having sports radio on when I was growing up, and so that definitely influenced my career in a way. But then the career specific influences, I've just been I've been exposed to some of the greats in the industry, and for the most part have been met with just wonderful experiences, and being given the time of day. And so I appreciate them very much. And I'll name a couple of them. I mean, Chris Carlin is one. He's been a real career confidant, I should say, for me. I you know, text him for advice all the time. I appreciate that. And you know, Michael K is another one who I don't even know very well, but every interaction we've had, he's just been so gracious. He would listen. He's dropped me a line from time to time with kind words. So I just appreciate that so much. Mike Breen, like I went up to him at Madison Square Garden. I was covering a game, and I saw him standing nearby. I was just going to introduce myself, and he said my name before I could. And I was floored that he, you know, would remember that. And, you know, same thing, has just been so kind. And funny enough, Kevin Burkhardt is another one who, like, I ribbed with him recently. Like I subjected him to watching one of my early reels that I feel bad that I had him watch that. But he actually, funny enough, he worked at WGHT radio long ago. So funny enough, we both that's how we first kind of connected. We had that in common. And that's just to name a few. But by having those interactions, it's made me sort of realize a new measure of success, because it's not just for me. It's not just being or attempting to be elite at your craft. It's also paying it forward. It's trying to just make a difference in somebody else's life if you have the ability to. And so it's something that I've kept in the back of my mind of like, okay, success isn't just making it here. Success is like making it, and also just being kind to people. So I appreciate them. And again, just a few examples of like influences that I want to emulate.
No, great answer. No, absolutely. I mean, those are, like you said, those are some of the giants in their fields, whether it's Burkhardt NFL, obviously Mike Breen, Michael K. I mean, geez, that is definitely some
I've been lucky working in New York that I've sort of, you know, crossed paths at times, which was good.
Yeah. And also it's funny because I could talk about the New York angle, but again, I'll maybe save that for some other time down the road. As far as a game or
Yeah.
an event, which one would you like to do if this was going to be the last event that you would ever cover?
Ooh. Um, I've really enjoyed covering women's college basketball. I did a Final Four last year. I loved it. Could definitely see like a national championship game. Um, I mean WNBA finals would be cool too.
Oh, nice.
Another one, okay, this is a little off the rails, but
Okay.
I mentioned I like to play beach volleyball. That's like like a hobby of mine. I would love to cover the Olympics. I
Oh,
fell in love with watching Olympic beach volleyball years ago.
right.
So maybe that. So there's a few, but I've been lucky, like I said, I've been lucky enough to cover like a variety of things. And so yeah, yeah, gosh, that's tough. But I gave you a few options.
No, that's fantastic. As far as your dream interview, this is a two-parter.
Ooh, dream interview.
The person that's alive, who would you love to interview? It doesn't have to be sports either. It could be somebody.
I would really think about it, but like the first person that came to mind was like Steph Curry. Like,
Oh, really?
just
Okay.
so much respect for Steph. Yeah, we'll go or LeBron. Like, I mean, probably one of those two.
Okay. Now, what about someone who's not living? If you were
Mm-hmm.
able to turn back the clock and just sit face to face across whomever, man or woman.
This is kind of random. Going off of the sports thing,
No, that's
like
fine.
going away from sports for a second. Like I thought of like an actor like Paul Newman. Like I would love to like interview. You know, it's funny we brought up Michael K before. I love Center Stage,
Right.
and
Yes.
he has interviewed. He's had a chance to sit down and have real sit down conversations with so many different people, and like such a range, like between athletes and actors, and like just all, like I think that is like cool as hell. So
Oh, yeah.
that's something I would love.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
What about let me see. I have two more.
Okay.
Well, I was going to save this one for last, but your future. I understand you're at Action Network.
Yeah.
If there is a bigger plan, a bigger goal, what would that be?
Oh, well, I always say I won't really know until it's staring at me. And I know that kind of sounds nuts, but like I never like planned necessarily any of those stepping stones that I discussed with you, or along the way. I didn't know what it was going to look like until it was presented to me. And so I think that kind of remains to be seen. There's certainly areas that I'm interested in, and this current chapter at Action Network, I don't even know. I mean, this could be sort of the way the industry is changing, and the way that this company is changing. I mean, my current role here, there's probably potential for growth, and so I'll have to get back to you on that one. I just think I'm trying to kind of live in a temporary moment as much as I can, and just be kind of open to a lot of different things.
All right. And lastly, when you look back from just that teenage girl when you were in high school to where you are now, what was the biggest thing you've learned in this business?
Oh, just work.
Hmm.
Work is everything. I mean, I talked about networking before. Networking is important, but you have to be able to back up your networking with the real work. And I think the work is what shines through. The preparation is what shines through. And also the passion. I like P words today. Preparation and passion is super important. If you're passionate about it, you're probably going to do a good job because you care.
Right.
You have to. That's the other thing. I feel like you have to care. And I care about everything, probably to a fault. I care about the tiniest detail on like every show that I do. And I care about the people. I care about the truth. And that's why I want to make sure I'm presenting context. And like when I interview like athletes or coaches or whatever, like I really try to think about them instead of me, instead of like what's convenient for me. I'm always like, I want to be respectful of their time. Like I want to, the way that I phrase my questions, I put a lot of thought into it. Sure. because they're people. So I just care about making them feel comfortable, making them feel like they can confide. And so yeah, just all those things. I know these are supposed to be quick hitters, but I'm apparently impossible for that.
No, it's fantastic that you're expounding on that, because even though I know there's supposed to be rapid fire, but there's a lot. And can I throw one more P word at you?
Yes.
Purpose.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh, wait.
That is one I truly believe in.
You know, it's so funny you say that. I'm so on the same page with you, because I thought about that too. I literally, again, with the notes in the phone, hold on. I almost feel compelled that I should pull it up.
Oh, please.
Let's see if I can search it. How the hell do you search on here and your iPhone?
iPhone?
Notes? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you go to the
I got it. Hold on. Wait, I got it. Hold on. Purpose. Okay. This is getting deep.
No, I love it.
I'm sharing this with you.
Oh, please.
I felt inspired one day, and I wrote this down. Don't steal this. Anyone out there, this is my intellectual property.
Exactly.
To find purpose in life, identify the problem in the world that you can help solve. So I think the reason I was thinking of that is I was thinking of my role within the women's basketball space in particular, and feeling like, and again, the sport's in a great place right now, but maybe 5 years ago, just feeling like maybe in the like cultural perspective or perception, it wasn't getting the respect it deserved. And I felt like part of my purpose, honestly, was to use just my position to make sure I was covering it with consistency, with nuance, being thorough with it, and identifying opportunities that other people maybe were overlooking, or they were afterthoughts, and saying, hey, this is an opportunity where we need to cover this, and just being creative. And that is, I think, a section of my purpose.
That's a good way to land this plane, that's for sure. And trust me, I could talk a lot about purpose, a lot life, and that's a whole other podcast that has nothing to do with sports. But I love the vibe. I love where you're coming from, Maria. Thank you so much for your time. All the best there at Action Network for many years to come, and for whatever you do. And maybe another P word down the road would be pivot. So, but that's not for today. That's for another time.
Lots of pivoting. Hold on. Let's recap all the P words. We got patience, persistence, progress, passion, preparation, purpose, and make sure you pivot when you need to.
Right.
All right.
And one last thing I will say, on a scale of 1 to 10, you were a 10 as far as your performance.
Hey. All right. Thank you very much
for
having me. I'm glad we could do this.
Yes. Thank you so much, Maria.
All righty. See you.
Thanks to Maria Marino for joining us here on the podcast. It was definitely a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed that conversation that we had. And as always, people, if you haven't subscribed, rated, and reviewed the podcast, please do so on Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com. Of course, that's the website. Whatever you could do to the sports fan in your life, if you haven't done so, please throw me a few stars, write a review. I'd greatly appreciate it. If you haven't followed me, or if you dare to follow me, or even care to follow me on social media, you could do so at the following: on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. And if you want to hit me up with any questions, comments, or suggestions, you could do so at the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. Whatever you want to send, I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. And then lastly, if you want to contribute to this endeavor, you could do so by going to my Patreon page. That's P as in Paul, A-T as in Tom, R-E-O-N as in Nancy.com/the JAYREELZ Podcast. Whatever you want to put forth goes 100% to this production, the upkeep of the website, the equipment, etc. Anything and everything that has to do with me talking into this microphone, coming through your earbuds, headphones, or speakers, whether it's to entertain, to inform with my passion, energy, fire, and fury, because this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, and whatever you could do on your end to contribute, whether it's through Patreon or, of course, go to my social media accounts, as well as subscribing, rating, reviewing, liking, whatever it may be, it will go a long way into increasing the visibility of this podcast, because I'm not going anywhere. One more time, this is what I love to do, people. This is what I love to talk about. Anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the Southeast, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.